Welcome to Lost Pharaoh Lore, where the sands of ancient Egypt whisper their secrets as you drift towards sleep. Tonight, we explore a profound story of ambition, faith, and humanity's eternal struggle against mortality. We'll journey to a time when pyramids rose like mountains from the desert floor and gods walked among mortals. A time when pharaohs dreamed not just of ruling in life, but of conquering death itself. The ancient Egyptians had a relationship with death unlike any other civilization in history. For them, death was not an ending but a transition, a doorway to another form of existence that could be even more magnificent than life on Earth. They did not fear death as we often do today. Instead, they spent their lives preparing for it, seeing the afterlife as the ultimate destination of their earthly journey. This understanding shaped everything about their culture. Their greatest monuments were tombs. Their most skilled artisans devoted their talents to funerary equipment, and their most profound texts were guides to the afterlife. The pharaohs, those god-kings who ruled over the two lands, were particularly consumed with the question of eternal life. Tonight, we'll focus on one pharaoh who pursued immortality with such determination that his name echoes through the corridors of time, even now, thousands of years after his death. His quest for eternal life would change the landscape of Egypt, transform its religious practices, and leave us with some of the most magnificent treasures ever created by human hands. As you settle in and prepare for sleep, imagine the warm, dry air of the Egyptian desert, the mighty Nile flowing like a ribbon of life through the golden sands, and the imposing silhouette of temples and pyramids against the star-filled sky. Let's begin our journey to ancient Egypt, to the time of a pharaoh who dared to challenge death itself. Our story begins more than 3,000 years ago, in what historians call the New Kingdom period of ancient Egypt, specifically during the 18th dynasty. It was a golden age when Egypt stood at the height of its power and influence, its armies victorious, its treasuries overflowing, and its monuments rising ever higher toward the heavens. Into this world of splendor and ambition came a boy named Amenhotep, meaning Ammonius is satisfied. He was not born to be pharaoh, at least not immediately. As a younger son of Pharaoh Amenhotep III and his great royal wife Queen Tai, the young prince grew up in the shadows of the royal palace at Thebes, surrounded by luxury but distant from the throne. The boy was thoughtful and observant from an early age. While his older brothers trained for military leadership and governance, young Amenhotep found himself drawn to the priests and their sacred knowledge. He would often slip away from his tutors to visit the temples, where he would watch the elaborate rituals performed to honor the many gods of Egypt. The priests noticed the curious young prince and began to teach him about the complex pantheon of deities, the creation myths, and most importantly, the secrets of the afterlife. The boy was particularly fascinated by the cult of Aten, the sun disk, which was a relatively minor aspect of the sun god Ra. Something about the visible manifestation of divine power in the life-giving sun resonated deeply with the young prince. As fate would have it, the crown prince died unexpectedly, and suddenly young Amenhotep found himself heir to the throne. His education shifted abruptly from theological speculation to practical governance. Still, he never lost his fascination with religious matters, particularly those concerning the afterlife. When Amenhotep III died after a long and prosperous reign, his son ascended the throne as Amenhotep IV. He was likely in his late teens or early 20s, young for such responsibility, but not unusually so for Egyptian royalty. The young pharaoh was slender and had somewhat unusual features: an elongated face, a prominent chin, and heavy-lidded eyes that gave him a dreamy, contemplative expression. From the beginning of his reign, it was clear that this would not be a conventional pharaoh. While he dutifully performed the expected royal ceremonies and maintained his father's diplomatic relationships, his heart remained with his religious contemplations. Increasingly, he focused his attention on the Aten, the visible disk of the sun. Traditional Egyptian religion taught that the pharaoh became one with Osiris after death, joining the cycle of rebirth that ensured eternal life. But the young Amenhotep IV began to develop different ideas. What if there was another path to immortality? One that didn't require the elaborate preparations, mummification, and tomb goods that had been the Egyptian way for centuries. As he gazed at the sun disk, its rays extending down like arms ending in tiny hands. The young pharaoh had a revelation. The Aten was the true source of all life. Its light created everything, sustained everything, and perhaps could preserve everything, even beyond death. This realization would set him on a revolutionary path that would earn him both devotion and hatred, and ultimately, a kind of immortality that he never anticipated. In the 5th year of his reign, the pharaoh made a dramatic announcement that shocked the royal court and the powerful priesthood. He was changing his name to Akhenaten, meaning effective for the Aten. More than just a new royal title, this represented a profound religious transformation. Akhenaten declared that the Aten was not merely one god among many, but the only god worthy of worship, the creator and sustainer of all life. This was revolutionary in a society that had worshipped a vast pantheon of deities for thousands of years. The priests of Ammonius, who had grown wealthy and powerful over generations, were particularly alarmed. Their god had been effectively demoted, and with him their own status and influence. But Akhenaten was determined. His quest for eternal life had led him to a new understanding of divinity, and he would reshape Egyptian religion to reflect this vision. In doing so, he hoped to forge a direct connection with the divine source of creation, a connection that might transcend death itself. Akhenaten knew that his radical religious ideas would face resistance in Thebes, the traditional religious capital dominated by the powerful priests of Ammonius. He needed a fresh start, a place untainted by old traditions where his vision could take root and flourish. So he made a bold decision. He would build an entirely new capital city dedicated to the worship of the Aten. On the east bank of the Nile, about halfway between the traditional capitals of Memphis and Thebes, Akhenaten found a suitable location, a broad plain surrounded by cliffs that formed a natural amphitheater. Here, the sun rose dramatically between two mountains, creating a spectacular daily display of the Aten's power. The pharaoh named this place Akhenaten, Horizon of the Aten, though we know it today as Amarna. The speed with which the new city rose from the desert was astonishing. Thousands of workers were brought to the site, and within a few short years, a magnificent royal city emerged. Unlike the ancient capitals with their cramped streets that had grown organically over centuries, Akhenaten was planned with broad avenues and open spaces that allowed sunlight to penetrate everywhere, a physical manifestation of the Aten's all-encompassing presence. At the heart of the city stood the Great Aten Temple, an unusual structure that differed dramatically from traditional Egyptian temples. Where the older temples were dark, enclosed spaces with small sanctuaries accessible only to priests, the Aten Temple was open to the sky, a vast courtyard filled with hundreds of offering tables, where sacrifices could be made under the direct light of the sun disk. The royal palace was equally impressive, with colorful painted floors depicting natural scenes, expansive gardens filled with exotic plants, and artificial pools that reflected the sky. Throughout the city, artisans created a new style of art under the pharaoh's direction. Gone were the stiff, formal depictions of royalty that had characterized Egyptian art for millennia. In their place came flowing, naturalistic scenes showing the royal family in intimate moments. The pharaoh kissing his wife, bouncing his daughters on his knee, or making offerings to the Aten with his family at his side. This new artistic style served Akhenaten's religious purposes. By portraying himself and his family in natural, human poses, he emphasized the Aten's role as creator of all natural life. The royal family was shown with exaggerated features, elongated heads, thin limbs, and prominent bellies, perhaps to distinguish them as the chosen interpreters of the Aten's will. Most significantly, Akhenaten positioned himself and his great royal wife, the beautiful Nefertiti, as the sole intermediaries between humanity and the Aten. Traditional Egyptian religion had allowed people to approach many different gods through various priests, but in Akhenaten's theology, ordinary people could only worship the Aten through the royal couple. This gave the pharaoh unprecedented religious authority, and perhaps, he thought, a unique connection to the source of eternal life. As the new city flourished, Akhenaten and Nefertiti presided over elaborate ceremonies honoring the Aten. Each morning, they would ride in golden chariots through the city to greet the rising sun, their 6 daughters sometimes following in their own smaller chariots. The royal couple would make offerings at the many altars throughout the city, while musicians played and dancers performed to celebrate the life-giving power of the sun disk. For Akhenaten, these were not merely ceremonies but intimate communions with the divine source of all existence. Each time the warm rays of the sun touched his skin, he felt the Aten's presence, a presence he believed would ultimately grant him immortality not through the traditional preparations for the afterlife, but through an ongoing, eternal relationship with the divine. The city of Akhenaten became a physical embodiment of the pharaoh's quest for eternal life, a place where the boundary between earth and heaven, between mortal and divine, seemed thinner than anywhere else in Egypt. But even as his sacred city rose in splendor from the desert, forces were gathering against Akhenaten and his revolutionary vision. At the center of the Aten cult stood not just Akhenaten, but his entire family. Chief among them was his principal wife, Nefertiti, whose name meant, "The Beautiful One has come." Her beauty was legendary and is preserved for us in the famous limestone bust discovered in the workshop of the royal sculptor Thutmose, a masterpiece that shows her elegant features, long neck, and the distinctive flat-topped crown she often wore. But Nefertiti was far more than a beautiful consort. She was Akhenaten's partner in the new religion, often depicted in the same size as the pharaoh in artwork, a highly unusual practice that indicated her elevated status. In some scenes, she is shown making offerings to the Aten alone, performing duties traditionally reserved for the pharaoh or high priests. Later in Akhenaten's reign, she even took the name Nefertiti, meaning beautiful are the beauties of Aten, and may have been elevated to the status of co-regent. Together, Akhenaten and Nefertiti had 6 daughters: Meritaten, Meketaten, Ankhesenpeten, Neferneferutin Tasheret, Neferneferur, and Setapenra. Unlike previous eras when royal children were rarely depicted, these princesses were prominently featured in the art of Amarna. They appeared in family scenes, religious ceremonies, and official events, underlining the importance of the royal family as a unit in the worship of the Aten. The intimate family scenes carved on temple walls and palace apartments were revolutionary in Egyptian art. One famous relief shows Akhenaten and Nefertiti sitting together under the rays of the Aten, each holding and kissing one of their daughters, while others play around them. The sun's rays end in tiny hands, some holding Ankh symbols, representing life, that extend toward the royal family's nostrils, symbolizing how the Aten sustained them with the breath of life. These scenes conveyed an important theological message. The natural love within a family was a reflection of the Aten's creative power. By emphasizing their role as a loving family unit, Akhenaten and Nefertiti presented themselves as living examples of the Aten's benevolence, and as the perfect intermediaries between the god and the people of Egypt. Beyond Nefertiti, there may have been other important women in Akhenaten's life. Evidence suggests he may have married his own daughter Meritaten after Nefertiti's disappearance from the historical record. Some scholars also believe he may have taken his mother, Queen Tai, as a wife, following an ancient Egyptian tradition where pharaohs sometimes symbolically married their mothers to reinforce their divine right to rule. Most controversially, some evidence suggests another important royal figure was present at Amarna, the mysterious Smenkhare, who may have been Akhenaten's male lover or co-regent. The exact nature of their relationship remains debated by Egyptologists, as does the very identity of Smenkhare, who might possibly have been Nefertiti herself ruling under a different name. The nature of these relationships highlights an important aspect of Akhenaten's religious revolution. In his theology, the traditional Egyptian focus on male-female duality, represented by gods and goddesses in balanced pairs, was replaced by the concept of a single creator deity that transcended gender, the Aten. This allowed for fluid gender roles and relationships within the royal court, all sanctified by their connection to the divine sun disk. For Akhenaten, these close relationships weren't just political or personal. They were sacred connections that linked him more closely to the Aten. Each family member who shared his devotion to the sun disk became another anchor binding him to the source of eternal life. In his mind, perhaps, these bonds of love would help sustain him not just in this life but beyond, forming a network of devotion that death itself could not sever. Yet despite the intimate portrayal of the royal family in art, life in the palace at Akhenaten wasn't always idyllic. Inscriptions tell us that at least one of the princesses, Meketaten, died young, and a moving scene shows her parents grieving beside what appears to be her deathbed. This loss must have deeply affected Akhenaten, perhaps even shaking his faith in the protective power of the Aten. If the sun disk could not preserve his beloved daughter, what hope did it offer for his own quest for immortality? Still, Akhenaten persisted in his devotion to the Aten and continued to develop the theology that he believed would ultimately conquer death. The sun disk gave life to all creatures, sustained them during their time on earth, and Akhenaten fervently believed would continue to nurture them beyond the grave, not in the traditional Egyptian afterlife ruled by Osiris, but in an eternal existence bathed in the never-ending light of the Aten. After the initial flourishing of Akhenaten, cracks began to appear in Akhenaten's revolutionary vision. The dramatic religious changes had disrupted Egyptian society on multiple levels. The priests of Ammonius and other traditional gods, once wealthy and influential, had been stripped of their power. The common people, who had for generations sought divine help from a variety of accessible deities, now found themselves able to worship only through the distant pharaoh. Perhaps most seriously, Akhenaten's obsession with religious matters led to a neglect of governance and international relations. Clay tablets discovered at Amarna, known as the Amarna Letters, reveal that Egypt's vassal states in Syria-Palestine were under increasing threat from the Hittites and other powers. Yet their desperate pleas for military assistance went largely unanswered. "The king, my lord, has written to me, 'Guard the place of the king where you are,'" wrote one vassal ruler. "But how can I guard the place of the king? Let the king, my lord, send out archers." Yet Akhenaten seemed more concerned with religious ceremony than with maintaining Egypt's empire. Economic problems also mounted. The vast resources poured into building Akhenaten and maintaining the new religious practices strained the treasury. Traditional trade networks were disrupted by the religious upheaval, and some evidence suggests food shortages occurred in parts of Egypt during this period. Around the 12th year of Akhenaten's reign, a series of personal tragedies struck the royal family. As mentioned earlier, Princess Akhenaten died, possibly during childbirth. Archaeological evidence suggests other members of the royal family may have perished as well, perhaps from a plague that swept through Egypt. Most mysteriously, Nefertiti disappears from the historical record around this time. Whether she died, fell from favor, or assumed a new identity, possibly as the co-regent Smenkhare, remains one of Egyptology's most enduring puzzles. These losses must have deeply affected Akhenaten, perhaps causing him to question the protective power of the Aten. If his god could not preserve his beloved family members, what hope did it offer for his own immortality? Yet publicly, at least, he maintained his devotion to the sun disk. As opposition to his religious policies grew, Akhenaten's approach became increasingly authoritarian. Inscriptions show that he ordered the name of Ammonius chiseled out from monuments throughout Egypt, even from the names of his own father and ancestors. Teams of workers were sent to desecrate traditional temples and remove references to the plurality of gods. This vandalism further alienated many Egyptians, who saw it as an attack on their cultural heritage. In the later years of his reign, evidence suggests Akhenaten may have moderated some of his most extreme positions. He appointed Akhenaten, later Tutankhamun, believed to be his son by a secondary wife, as co-regent, perhaps recognizing that his revolution needed a smoother transition to survive him. Some artwork from this period shows a slight return to more traditional styles, possibly indicating a tentative reconciliation with Egypt's religious establishment. Despite these concessions, the fundamental tension remained. Akhenaten had staked everything, his reign, his legacy, and his hope for immortality, on the worship of the Aten. He could not abandon this central pillar of his identity without admitting the failure of his entire life's purpose. Around the 17th year of his reign, Akhenaten died. The circumstances of his death remain unclear. He was probably in his early 40s, not elderly by the standards of Egyptian royalty. Some scholars have suggested he might have suffered from a genetic disorder that affected his health, while others propose he might have been assassinated by those opposed to his religious reforms. The truth may never be known. What is certain is that Akhenaten's body was initially entombed in a royal sepulchre he had prepared at Akhenaten. Unlike the grand pyramids of the Old Kingdom or the elaborate rock-cut tombs of the Valley of the Kings, Akhenaten's tomb was relatively modest, a series of chambers cut into the cliffs east of his city. This simplicity reflected his focus on the Aten rather than the traditional funerary practices, but it may also have made his tomb more vulnerable to later desecration. The pharaoh who had devoted his life to achieving immortality through the worship of the Aten now faced the ultimate test of his beliefs. Would his revolutionary theology preserve him in death, as he had hoped, or would the traditional gods of Egypt, whom he had rejected and insulted, have the final say? In the final irony of Akhenaten's remarkable story, the pharaoh who rejected tradition and was rejected by tradition has achieved a form of immortality that none of his predecessors could have imagined. Though the priests of Ammonius did everything in their power to erase him from history, destroying his monuments, defacing his images, removing his name from king lists, and desecrating his mummy, they ultimately failed. Today, more than 3,300 years after his death, Akhenaten is one of the most recognizable and discussed pharaohs of ancient Egypt. His distinctive profile appears in museums worldwide. His religious revolution is studied in universities, and his family drama continues to captivate our imagination. Books, films, operas, and symphonies have been created about him. Scientists have analyzed his DNA and reconstructed his appearance. Theologians debate his influence on religious thought. The pharaoh who wanted eternal life has indeed found it, not through the magical preparations he rejected or the revolutionary theology he embraced, but through humanity's enduring fascination with his story. His immortality exists not in the field of reeds or the eternal light of the Aten, but in our collective cultural memory. Perhaps there is a profound lesson in Akhenaten's strange journey to immortality. Sometimes the legacy we actually achieve is vastly different from the one we pursue. Sometimes the very traditions and institutions we reject end up preserving our memory. And sometimes the quest for eternal life leads not to the immortality of the soul but to the immortality of the story. As the great pharaohs of Egypt knew well, to be remembered is its own form of eternal life. And in that sense, the pharaoh who wanted eternal life has indeed conquered death. His name continuing to be spoken and his story continuing to be told thousands of years after the sand covered his sacred city and the sun set on his revolution. If you've enjoyed this journey through ancient Egypt and the fascinating story of Akhenaten's quest for immortality, I invite you to join our community of history enthusiasts at Lost Pharaoh Lore. Please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more immersive bedtime stories from the ancient world. Your support helps us continue exploring the rich tapestry of Egyptian mythology and history. If Akhenaten's revolutionary ideas captured your imagination, share this video with someone who appreciates thought-provoking historical narratives. The pharaoh who spent his life trying to change how Egyptians viewed the divine would surely appreciate his story reaching new minds. What other Egyptian pharaohs or ancient mysteries would you like us to explore in future videos? Let us know in the comments below. Your suggestions directly shape our upcoming content. Until our next journey along the Nile, may your dreams be filled with golden sunlight, magnificent temples, and the whispered secrets of ancient civilizations. Like the Aten's rays extending their ink-tipped hands, may you be touched by the eternal wonder of Egypt's enduring legacy. Sleep well, dear listeners, beneath the same stars that once watched over the city of the horizon.